Okay, moving on. All right, so with the addition of the risk-free asset, investors must make three decisions. As Donald Trump would say and George W. Bush would say, investors must make three decisions. All right, what is the optimal portfolio of risky assets? Okay, so put together your portfolio of risky assets. What is the optimal combination of the risky portfolio and the risk-free assets? So how much do we want to put in the risky portfolio and how much do we want to put in the risk-free portfolio? Okay. And a third question, do investors want to increase risk by using margin or leverage? Do you want to increase risk? How do you increase risk? By using margin or leverage. Okay, three questions. Ultimately, each investor applies his or her own utility curves to the decision regarding how much risk to take. So here you go. Looks a lot like the Markowitz efficient frontier here, but now we're going to use the capital market line here, and the utility curves will be based on the individual utility that each investor has. So each investor decides where on this line they want to be, how much risk they're willing to take in exchange for the extra return they are supposed to earn. Okay? So up to point M right here, investors are funding their entire investment with their own cash. Okay? But past point M, as you move up here, you are now borrowing in order to buy securities, and that is leverage, margin or leverage, and that increases your risk. Why would you do that? In order to increase your return. Okay? So these are decisions that investors have to make. What is the optimal, what are the efficient portfolios of risky assets? What combination of risky and risk-free? And where on this line in terms of, do you want to use your own assets to fund the portfolio, or do you want to borrow? Okay? Let's look at an alternative measure of risk, an alternative to standard deviation. That's what we've looked at so far, standard deviation. So there are two components of total risk. One component is what we call unsystematic risk. Okay? This is risk that is exclusively related to a specific company or to one security. One security. Okay? Examples are financial or credit risk, product failure, technological obsolescence, and or management incompetence. These are things that could go wrong at a specific company. All right? This component of total risk, unsystematic or company-specific risk, sometimes they call it idiosyncratic risk, isn't that a fancy word, can be eliminated through adequate diversification. And we've talked about diversification, bringing in different types of assets, different types of asset classes into one portfolio that have different return patterns that offset each other. And so we can eliminate unsystematic risk. Okay? And this is a major responsibility of the portfolio manager. As you are building a portfolio, one of the things that you should have at the top of your list is diversifying that portfolio. Okay? All right, so the chart below illustrates total risk broken into systematic and unsystematic risk on the y-axis. So here's total risk here, okay? And this, the x-axis is the number of stocks in the portfolio. So here we're adding to the number of stocks in the portfolio, and up here we're talking about risk, okay? And what we see through this curve, okay, broken into systematic risk and unsystematic risk, the line with the negative slope illustrates the reduction in unsystematic risk that is attributable to diversification. As we add stocks, the unsystematic risk starts to drop very rapidly. It then flattens out, okay? But as we add the number of securities, the unsystematic or company-specific risk drops very rapidly, Okay? The black arrow shows how diversification can almost completely eliminate unsystematic risk. So here we have total risk that consists of unsystematic and systematic, and by diversifying, we can drop unsystematic risk down to here, which is almost a complete elimination of unsystematic risk. What is left is systematic risk, okay? Some studies indicate that 8 to 12 stocks in different economic sectors are needed to significantly reduce unsystematic risk, that it takes 8 to 12 stocks. Other studies indicate that 30 to 40 stocks are required. Personally, I agree with the 30 to 40 stocks. In my long career as an investment manager, as a portfolio manager, I believe it takes 30 to 40 stocks to really do a thorough job of diversifying a stock portfolio so that we eliminate as much unsystematic risk as possible. Okay? Since unsystematic risk can be virtually eliminated through diversification, the only remaining risk of an individual security is the security's sensitivity to variables that affect the overall market or the economy. So company-specific risk is eliminated, but sensitivity to the overall market, sensitivity to the overall economy is not eliminated by diversifying. Examples of these types of variables, things that affect the individual stocks and the stock market that cannot be diversified away by adding to the number of stocks, would be things like inflation, interest rates, or political or economic disruptions. These things will affect all securities, and you can't diversify them away. Okay? A security's sensitivity to these macroeconomic or systemic variables is called systematic risk. Sensitivity to these big economic variables. Okay? And you can see that you don't diversify those away by adding to the number of stocks in your portfolio. However, there is a way to lower systematic risk, and that is to diversify into securities outside of the system, and that's foreign securities. Okay? I would also add that if you bring in other types of asset classes that react differently to these variables than stocks do, then you can also reduce some systematic risk. But let me just say that if there is a major economic calamity, meltdown, or disruption in a system, there are no asset classes that will be safe from this type of negative situation. However, investing in foreign securities, so the first thing you want to do is diversify by adding to your number of stocks to get rid of unsystematic risk. The second thing you want to do is add to your foreign securities and add to other asset classes in order to lower your systematic risk. All right, I think that takes us, let's take a quick look at where we need to be, and Chapter 7, so we've successfully completed half of this. We're going to take a quick break. See you in just a minute. Shalom.